It has been 2 years since I finished the Addams Family project, and it has been 1 year since I dropped it off at the Mini Time Machine Museum of Miniatures in Tucson, Arizona. And tomorrow, I'm going back. And not to pick it up like I originally thought. They want to keep it for another whole year, which means they must really be enjoying it, which makes me very happy. And there's a possibility that I may be able to show some more work in the future. So why am I going back now, you may be asking? I'm going to be teaching a class at the museum, and I'm also going to be taking a few new miniatures to put into the Addams Family house. Mainly, I'm going to be taking Pubert, who has been famously missing from the Addams Family mansion ever since I finished it. I'm also going to be displaying a few projects while I'm there, which I've already got packaged up, and you may also have noticed that the Fairfield is missing from its regular spot, and that's because the Fairfield is going with me too. So starting with the main attraction, Pubert was made and sent to me by Jenny Hendricks. He has his classic little onesie with the spider emblem on the chest. He is movable, and he definitely has his Gomez-like mustache. Thank you so much, Jenny, for making Pubert for my project. Jenny also created his little gown that you see in the scene where he's playing with Wednesday and Pugsley. I love that she included this gown because this is one of the first scenes where we see that Pubert is truly an Addams.
Woe to the Republic.
Fun fact for you, Pubert is actually the name that Charles Addams originally wanted to give to Pugsley, but the TV executives would not let him do that. The gown is designed to be simply tied over top of the onesie, and then the bonnet fits really cutely on top of his little head. Before packing him up completely for the trip, I decided to make a small hanger, so when I get to the house, it's easy to hang it up inside of it. To make this, I am just going to be using a paper clip, and I'm forcing it into shape with some wire cutters, wire working tools, until I feel like it's a pretty decent hanger. It's not shaped perfectly, but it will work for this project. Once I make sure that it fits inside of the gown, I can go ahead and pack everything away, making sure everyone's very secure for the trip. And then it's on to the next family member.
Kitty cat, come on out! Doctor's here! That's Kitty cat?
Kitty first appeared in the 1960s television show and has since appeared in many of the other versions of the Addams Family. There is simply a sound reference in the 1990s movies.
Down, Kitty!
And he does show up again in the animated movies that most recently came out. So I always knew that I wanted to add him into my project, but I never knew how until I started learning how to needle felt. And now I'm pretty happy with the version I came up with. I did this while I was watching TV and laying in bed, so I don't have video of his creation, but I do have a photo log of how he came to be, and I will try to put some information on the screen if you want to know the steps that I went through. But I really am enjoying needle felting, especially now that I'm learning a bit more about it. I think I can include some more animals in my future projects. I really wanted to make sure and get the dark color underneath Kitty's mane that you can see in the 1960s version. He seemed to be a really unique lion, and I wanted to make sure that I reflected that as best as I could. Because he has a pipe cleaner armature underneath all of the wool, I'm hoping that once I get to the house, I can figure out how to pose him, and it won't be too hard to get him into a place where he looks comfortable inside of the house. Once I was done creating the main body structure and got it back into my studio in the bright lights, I could tell you could still see some of the pipe cleaners through where there were very thin areas of wool. I also wanted to try ironing down some of the fuzzy bits. I'm still learning about types of wool when it comes to needle felting, and I'm not quite sure I used the best kind, but I'm still happy with the results, so I'm moving forward. The iron did help quite a bit on laying down the fuzzies, but now I'm going to try some chalk pastel to see if I can add a little bit more color, definition, shading, and also cover up some of those areas where you can still see the white pipe cleaner through the needle felting. I had never tried this process before, so of course I started right in the middle of the face of something I need to pack up and take on a trip. But you know, just go bold or go home sometimes. Probably would have been better to start somewhere a little bit more inconspicuous, but this did work really well, and I found that it stuck to the needle felting and I didn't feel like it was coming off on my hands. I mixed a few different pastels to see if I could match the color of the fur, and then I also added some details like where the paws would have been separated, which was a little bit more difficult to do with the wool. And this is the final result with a bit more color added, a bit more shading, and I'm pretty happy with how he looks. I won't be changing his shape or anything until I get there, so I made a very small needle felting kit to go with me, just in case I have to do a bit more felting once we're there. And I also have some extra colors, just in case, and he's ready to be packaged to go on the trip along with Pubert. I've also decided to take Mini Aira, who was made by Misfit Doll Co. I thought it'd be fun to put her in the Addams Family house. However, she does not have any shoes. So, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. I'm gonna have to borrow his shoes. They're only shoes I have that are removable, and I don't have time to make any for Mini Aira. I'm really sorry. Borrowing clothing from Beetlejuice is not the most ideal. But hopefully I can make Mini Aira some of her own shoes once I get back from the trip. So thank you, Beetlejuice, for your help. I'm using some museum wax on the bottom of her feet so that the shoes will fit a little bit better. They're a bit big and I'm afraid I'm going to lose them or they're going to fall off, so this will help them stick on. Now that she's got some shoes for the trip, I can go ahead and remove her glasses for safety, buckle her in, and put her to the side with everyone else who's ready for the trip. Because I had just finished the Shining project before this trip, I thought it would be a fun one to bring along with me. However, I had to get a case ready for it to be displayed. So I decided to use this display case that's usually used for like footballs or like sports shoes. So I had to rip off the AstroTurf and I put a new cover on it, and then it also is kind of fit really weird, so I decided to glue it on top of some cardboard and make my own frame. And that's also because it was just slightly too short where the sand that's on top of the snow was scratching the top of the lid. So I had to be inventive, make my own frame to lift up the plastic so that it wouldn't be scratched. Then I just painted it black. I went over the little seam that was where the scrapbook paper, it's kind of a velvety paper, was on top. And then it was ready for the Shining project, and I was pretty happy with how the display came out. I had promised to show you that, so I wanted to make sure and include it in this video because it was important to get done before I went on my trip. I also decided to bring along the abandoned coffee shop, which is one of the original projects on my channel, and it is in the same case that I haven't modified, but it was very dusty, so this was an easy fix. I just had to dust it and make sure the case was clean. Everything's done, everything's packed. I'm so excited. Now it is time to go. It's time to make a 14-hour drive out to the miniature museum. We ended up leaving about 6:45. We've been on the road for an hour and it's just now light enough to where I think the camera will work. And as you can see, you've got quite a bit in the back of the car and then there's more in the trunk. It all fit. Yay! And yeah, so 1 hour down of the 14 that we need to get to Tucson, Arizona. We got to our Airbnb pretty late on day 1, and then day 2 it was time for Artist in the Gallery. There were going to be 2 sessions. I was at the museum and getting to meet people, so it was really fun to get there and see the museum again. Well, it's locked. We better go home. During the Artist in the Gallery event, I was able to set up a table with the abandoned coffee shop, the Fairfield, and the Shining Project, and this was all in front of the case that had the Addams family mansion. It was so great to see it again. I actually started setting things up before I even took time to turn around and really look at it. I didn't end up filming any of the part where I was talking to people because I didn't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. It's always weird when there's a camera there. So I just enjoyed my time getting to talk to everybody, and I had made these little QR codes, so if there was anyone who wasn't familiar with my YouTube channel and they wanted to know more about the projects, they could easily find the videos. I really enjoyed sharing these with everybody, and I thought it was great to bring the Fairfield because there were a lot of people who had questions about scale, and it was a great example of half scale versus 1/12 scale. I wanted to also include a few clips of other displays in the museum because there is really just a lot to see in the Mini Time Machine Museum. They had this display as a memorial to Queen Elizabeth. And especially in the historical part of the museum, there was a lot of European history, specifically because that's where the dollhouse hobby really started getting big, was in Europe. And I really enjoyed seeing some of the dates on these and seeing some of the history over why they were created. And the other thing that was really interesting is the variety of scale. Even in these older projects, they were using Phoebe Buffet scales.
Every house should have a dog. Not one that can pee on the roof.
So if you still feel like you don't have scale down perfectly, don't worry. This has been something going on in the dollhouse world for hundreds of years. A few of them, I just really liked the ambiance inside of the houses. I really enjoyed seeing the architecture, and really it becomes more of a snapshot into the lives of these people who had created these. It's even more interesting to me than a photograph at times. It shows these craftsmen that were duplicating their lives and what was going on in their lives at the time that they created each one of these pieces. There's no flash photography allowed in the museum, but I do love that they do let you take photos and videos so that you can remember what you saw there and the inspiration you felt by other creators and other cultures around the world. On day 3, I had the honor of teaching a lovely group of people in a class. This was a class on how to create a gingerbread house out of cardboard and some lightweight spackling. I made sure to bring lots of goodies. The class came with a certain amount of fake candy, and then you could purchase more if you just really wanted to go all out. I showed how to put the house together, and these were some of my samples. It was just a really fun class and a really fun group. Day 4 was a Monday, which is a day when the museum is typically closed, so they were able to open up the Addams family case so I could finally get in there. And this is some shaky footage of me actually kind of running up to the house to just really get a good look after almost a year. Actually, over a year. Cousin It is still walking baby What in the front in the pram, so it looks like all is well. Okay, the first thing I want to do before I add Pubert into the house is the family members have been standing in the same position for a year. So I'm going to move them around a little bit, put them in some new locations, and anyone who comes back to visit the museum will be able to look for their favorite characters in new spots. First thing first, Gomez and Morticia had been in different rooms for far too long. They needed to be together in the living room. I put them in kind of a tango dance type position, which honestly was a little difficult because of the rug, and then I kept trying to find a good place so the light was on their face, but eventually I figured it out. Also, Lurch had been vacuuming in the same place for a year. I think it's clean enough, probably a few other areas that need dusting, so I'm moving him over to the conservatory. He's going to go in the very back part of the room so he can have a conversation with one of his favorite visitors, Dr. Penderschloss. On the second floor, I decided to move Cousin It into his room. He'd been walking in the front yard for a while, and I think he deserves a rest. I also think putting Cousin It in this room really highlights the ceiling height difference with the rest of the house. Likewise, Uncle Fester was tired of being in his room, so I was thinking at first that he could go near the train table. I've had a lot of questions on why there isn't a train table. There is one, it's just kind of small and towards the back, so I thought he could be blowing it up, but later I changed my mind. Also, Grandmama, which usually hangs out in the kitchen isn't at the museum, it's still at my home, and so Grandmama's kind of hanging out in the dining room, making sure everything's set up for dinner. I decided to move Pugsley over by the train table with the explosives because that made more sense in my mind that Pugsley would be following in his father's footsteps and playing with the trains. Also, Wednesday was done playing with the electrical chair, and so I put Marie Antoinette back on her bed and decided to give her one of her favorite toys, and she's also a little bit closer to her pet spider. I had to get those braids laying straight. Finally, I found the right place for Uncle Fester. I know how much the Addams love their neighbors, and really they hadn't been interacting with any of the other dollhouses in the museum, so I felt like Uncle Fester on the roof with the cannon was a perfect choice. I also decided to move Baby What. Especially since Pubert was coming to the house, I figured the babies would like to play together. Thankfully, he was pretty easy to remove from the carriage without causing any damage. So now I can move the carriage back to the front, kind of parked as if they were done taking their walk, and Baby What is now up in the attic where the kids typically play. Now it's time to add in our main attraction for this video, which is Pubert. He's finally made it all the way home after a long car ride. And of course he gets a warm welcome by spending some time in the cage up in the attic. And I added a little toy for him and What to play with. And I can't imagine who would probably put him in this position. I don't know. I couldn't think of who it could possibly be.
We just want to play with him, especially his head.
Here's a close-up tour of where all the family members ended up. I'm pretty happy with their placement, and I'm really glad I thought about moving them around. I did actually move Morticia and Gomez back a little bit more, so there's some more light on their face. But initially I hadn't thought about moving them. I was just going to add in Pubert, but I think this gives returning guests to the museum a little bit more interest if they're seeing this project for a second or third time. There's new family members to find. So now that Pubert's in place, I definitely need to get Kitty out and make sure that Kitty is in an interesting location as well. Thankfully, since Uncle Fester is pretty busy, his room is empty, and I think it would be a great place for a house cat to have a little rest. I struggled for a while on where I wanted to place him. Originally, when I created him, I thought I would like him to be on the stairs because you see him in the original TV show coming down the stairs. But the stairs in this house are much too steep and very narrow, so I've decided to go ahead and have him laying down, which they do show him laying down in the original TV show as well. Because I'd used pipe cleaners for the inside of his armature, I was able to start bending his limbs to try and match a picture that I found on my phone of how a lion would naturally lay. This did reveal that his legs might be a tiny bit short, or they just don't naturally stretch like a real lion, but I was pretty happy with the initial results. It turned out to be a good thing that I brought my little emergency needle felting kit because I feel like I was able to get a much more natural pose by felting the front paws together so that they were laying a little bit flatter. I know you can't see very well with the camera angle. I was trying to make sure I was in the light so that you could at least see Kitty. I also did a bit of needle felting on the back legs, but not as much as the front. I rearranged Uncle Fester's room a little bit, made sure Debbie was still in place, and then I put Kitty up against Uncle Fester's bed as though he's resting against the trunk. And he's still very close to Pubert, his traveling buddy, to make sure he doesn't get into too much trouble. Last but not least, I had to move Thing. He always seems to get overlooked or people aren't able to find him, so I put him right next to his sign that says "Beware of the Thing." He's now sitting on the front tree so that anyone who comes to visit the house will see him first. Then Minnie Ara reminded me she wasn't wearing Beetlejuice's gross shoes for nothing, and we did a few photo shoots around the house, sitting in Morticia's chair, up in the attic, playing with the babies. How cute, right? And then of course in the front yard. And I also took a photo, me and Minnie Ara, in front of the house for memory purposes. But then it was time to say goodbye. I did one last check over everything, and then it was time to close the case again. All the family members have been moved around. Kitty and Pubert are now in place, and it's time for me to leave them for yet another year. We did the 14-hour trip home in 2 days. We were pretty exhausted by this point, and so the first day we just tried to get into Texas, and we ended up traveling by full moon, which I do think Uncle Fester would have really approved of. I'm finally back from my trip. Everything went really well, except I forgot to put the gown that went with Pubert into the house. So that's something I'll have to do the next time that I see it. There was just so much going on and I didn't have it right in front of me. I knew I was going to forget something, and that's what I ended up forgetting. I know. I'm happy to be back too. Also, look what they gave me. It's the original sign. They had to get a new sign because this one had dates because they had extended the lease for another year. So they gave me the sign. However, as you can see, I had to kind of cut it up to get it in my car. It's because it's big and I don't really have a great place on the wall to put this. So it's going on the ceiling. And then every time I walk underneath it, I'll get the warm Addams Family fuzzies from remembering my project. So that's going to be all from me. I hope you enjoyed the video of my trip out to the museum to visit the Addams Family project. Thank you to everyone at the museum. Y'all were awesome. Thank you to everyone who came out to see me and everyone I got to meet. I hope you all have an amazing week, and I've got to make some more stuff because maybe I can bring something else to the museum next year. I hope you all have an amazing week, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. We shall see how long this stays up. I couldn't nail into the ceiling very easily. Apparently it's very wooden ceiling, which is great, but hard to nail into, so.